Welcome to the Spotlight on Marketing, brought to us by Armstrong Lloyd. I'm your host, Karen Lloyd, and today we are joined by Ana Castrillon, the head of marketing from Toku. Ana is a true global marketing expert with over a decade of experience in driving growth and innovation across the LATAM, EMEA, and the US market. And when she's not crafting killer marketing strategy, she's also a fellow podcast host of Hack to Startup. So I'm really excited to have her on the show today, and I'm really excited to get ready for some serious marketing wisdom from someone that really knows how to make waves in the global market. Welcome, Ana.
Hi, Karen. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very excited for this conversation, and it's kind of like weird to be on the other side of the microphone, but I'm really excited to be here.
No, exactly. Because also your other podcast, do you do it? It's actually in Spanish, isn't it? Your other podcast. Do you do it in Spanish or in English? Yes.
No, it's Spanish, full of Spanish.
In Spanish.
So, but yeah, it's like kind of like a weird to be on the other side. So now I get to feel what my guest feels when I'm interviewing them.
Yes, exactly. And in a different language, which I'm so admirable as someone who's not brilliant in languages, the fact that you can speak beautiful English as well as being able to translate, in your own, language in Spanish is amazing. Absolutely amazing in all.
Thank you.
Great. We know you're a really global marketeer and you're really got a brilliant handle on the Latin American market, which is your passion. So where does that passion for the Latin American tech market come from?
Well, it really comes from my heritage. So I was born in Colombia and lived there until my teenage years. Then I moved to Spain, where I finished high school and university. And when I lived in San Francisco, the tech market was kind of like in its prime back in 2010. And I got deeply involved in Latin American ecosystem, which was just starting to gain that momentum. And a lot of founders from Latam will move to San Francisco because that was basically where VCs were at. And I also got the chance to attend many events and connect with them. In my first job in San Francisco, I worked on Latam expansion, which really helped me to understand the region, unique challenges, the opportunity. I was also part of this organization called Latinas in Tech, which is a nonprofit organization we created to support women navigating questions and about like how to spend in the region, uplifting each other. So this experience really gave me more insight into the ecosystem and incredible potential that it had. So even though today I don't work 100% in the market, I always find ways to stay connected with the Latam tech ecosystem. We do have a bunch of communities built in London where we do a lot of events. And to me, it's like a passion that has stayed with me and continues to grow.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Absolutely amazing how you've like grown up and then also moved. And so you lived in San Francisco then and now London.
Yes, I lived in quite a few places, San Francisco, Mexico, France, and then now London.
Fantastic. So how have you found then marketing differ in the Latin American markets compared to the other regions that you've worked in?
I think marketing in every market is different. And one thing I noticed earlier in my career when I started like in the B2B was many US companies will try to copy and paste their go-to-marketing strategies into LATAM or Mexico because they thought I was like, okay, if it's working in the US, maybe it's going to work there. And the reality is that building in-person relationships is crucial for the Latin culture. So, for example, I remember back in the days when I was working at Zendesk, a lot of my US colleagues will just close deals over the phone, emails, without really needing to meet in person with them. And I'm not saying that in-person relationships aren't important in the US, but the dynamics are really different. In Latam, especially for certain industries, products, meeting in person and building that trust face-to-face is essential. And another key thing is the market context. So for instance, back then in the US, a lot of companies were already like cloud. Yes, we're going to move to the cloud. But in Latin America, cloud was not the first choice of the customers. So you still had to educate them. So creating the same marketing playbook that we were doing in the US and copy pasting that in the region was not going to work. So I think it's really important to know the context difference, because that is going to impact your strategy. And for instance, for the copy that you use for the campaigns, the visuals that you use for the billboards, the channels that you choose to deliver, because for instance, in LATAM, WhatsApp is huge, but in the US or perhaps in Europe is not that big. So you need to really adapt. And then another thing that I think is important is LATAM is a big market. And while most of people speak Spanish, you also have Brazil and they speak Portuguese. So, and also every country has their nuances. So I think in my experience, marketing in LATAM really has an element of in person, and you really have to focus on fostering those relationships, building trust, and ensuring the message resonates with the market unique needs.
So the call to action in LATAM will be very much a book the appointment in person, opposed to the US. You're saying it'll be let's get on a Zoom call, Teams call, and probably be quicker, I guess. Would it be quicker in the US?
Yeah, I think it also really depends of the product or the size of the solution that you're selling, because obviously for some transaction it's still online will work in Latin America, but if we're dealing with like a bigger organization, face to face is like 100%. And similar in the US, sometimes you can do a lot of things over Zoom, but then face to face will be required at some point for an enterprise deal. So I think it really, for me, the call to action is like make sure that whatever you're doing, if you're expanding to another market, make sure that you understand the context of the market and don't try and copy paste whatever is working in your headquarters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even have you worked in the European markets as well much? So how would you
Yes.
say that varies from the LATAM?
I think it's Europe is also, it's not like a homogeneous market in terms of like every country has a language, it has different cultures. And I will say in some countries in Europe, in person is also favored. But for instance, in the UK, you still can do a lot of deals over the phone, over a Zoom call. So I think it really depends. And to me, like UK and the US has a lot of similarities when it comes to business. But then, for instance, Spain is also very similar to Latin America, and Italy is also very similar to Latin America. So I think every country in Europe also has a lot of difference on how you treat business, and you really, as a marketeer, you need to understand that context.
I think Germany is one of the ones that lots of people really make mistakes with from my experience. Germany is one of those markets where it's much more formal and, there's a real nuance to working in it. They're also less forgiving, I think, that if you make a mistake quite early in the process, then bang, that's it. You've got to
Yeah.
really find someone else to get in because that person will block you.
Speaking the language is very important in Germany, same as French. In France, I remember French was de facto. Like they will be more comfortable having dealing if you speak their language, and even though if they might understand English and they can understand what you're saying, if you speak their language, it will be way better received. So I know that from Germany, and I know that from France as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why it makes it really difficult if you're a US company, in my opinion, and you're trying to crack those other markets. And not only are you using the same playbook, but you're also using the same salespeople. And then you've almost I don't know if there's any examples where people have had success at doing that, but I generally hear that it's very difficult unless
It
they know
doesn't
those.
work. And I think that's one area that I always say it's not about translating, it's about localizing. And to me, localizing is really truly going in the market with people on the ground. Like if the market requires a different language, you need to go and do that. If the market requires a different copy for your messaging, you need to go and do that. So you really have to adapt. And it's really important to hire people locally that understand the market so they can tell you, okay, maybe this copy doesn't work here, or maybe these images don't work here because it doesn't really make sense here. So I think it's really important. And oftentimes I've seen companies, and I'm not throwing out here like the US companies, but I've seen the US companies trying to go to the APAC and then having the same visuals that they have in the US. And I was like, that's not going to work, because in this country, they don't have backyards. For instance, they live in flats. So it's not going to resonate the advertising with them. So I think that at the end of the day, it's like whatever you're doing, if you're trying to go to a different market, make sure that you do your homework and then you hire people and you can adapt your marketing playbook to that country.
You've had also experience as an angel investor as well, haven't you? And you think, what
Yes.
marketing considerations do you think influence those sort of investment decisions in for that region?
Yeah, I'm going to speak just on the marketing considerations, because obviously one thing that is very important when you're investing is who is the team that is building that company. I think that's key for any company, but I'm going to speak about just more marketing considerations. So again, this really depends of the stage of the company. So for early stage startups, you look at the team ability to execute and their understanding of the market. So from a marketing perspective, I want to see, have they done a proper research? Do they understand how big is the market? What's the problem that they're trying to solve? How they're planning to attract more customers? Have they started testing their products with clients? And what's their feedback? And that's kind of like early stage, because at that point, you might not have a product market fit. You might not have a lot of customers, but you really need to understand what's the problem you're solving and what's the market and what's the opportunity. And then for companies that have already like a traction, like a product market fit, a lot of the questions we ask is like traction metrics, how they're acquiring customers, what's their cost per acquisition. If they're a SaaS company, do they have a churn rate? Are they tracking that? And do they have a kind of like a basic marketing strategies? How they're planning to scale? Do they have a clear roadmap? So things like that really help to make a decision. Or also, do they have like customer reviews? That really gives you an indicator of like, is the product good, or there is a potential on the product? And then again, a lot of the times, and especially for angel investment, you go into like very early stage companies. So you most of the time are focusing on the team, because at the end of the day, their ability to pivot the product, because I've seen companies that raise money for product A, and then down the line, product A becomes product B, because when they start going to market, they realize that they had a great potential to start selling the product in a different way. And that's okay. And I think it's the ability for that team to execute what really makes a difference when you are investing in an early stage startup.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's that agility, isn't it? That ability to pivot, change, and listen to your customer. You know, you may start. It's like anything. You start doing one thing, and then as you get feedback, you need to adapt. Otherwise, you're just a tunneled vision, and then you can't be arrogant and say no, no, no. We're sticking to our guns, and that's all we're doing. I think that's a really great example. And in this process, what has been your biggest aha moment as that leader, doing that? Because you've done so much, and so not just globally, but for small to big and everything else. So what has been that moment where you've gone, oh, or actually,
That's a really good question. I think it's related to what we were talking about, the expansion, but in a different way. So I started. My career has been in B2B. And when I was working back at in Zendesk, we were focusing on a small business and mid market. And at the same time, they were starting to develop their enterprise playbook. And I had moment for me was realizing that also the marketing strategy and the tactics cannot be copy or paste when you move from targeting a smaller organization to enterprises. And similar to what I said about entering new markets. So I'll give you an example. When I was working at Zendesk, we had a lot of a lot of people will come online and started a trial, and that was kind of like the de facto. But when we started like approaching enterprises, that the playbook changed, and they started investing more heavily in like targeted conferences to appeal to those enterprise audiences. And then we also announced a strategy to create our own conference. So back in the days, they call an event, and I think today it's still the same. It's called Relate. And it was an opportunity for them to meet with decision makers. They will engage with them and help them understand what the product could do for them. And also those conferences, around this conference, we will host like VIP dinners with key stakeholders, which created those opportunities to build like deeper relationships and trust. So that kind of like really became that aha moment where I say, okay, similar to when you go to a new market, if you're going to target a different cohort or like an enterprise playbook is completely different because you're not targeting one person. And oftentimes, if your product is going after SMBs, the decision maker maybe is like one person. They can go and say, okay, I'm going to buy this tool and that's it. My credit card, I'm buying it. But for enterprise, there's multiple stakeholders and you have to appeal to multiple stakeholders. There's a lot of people influencing the deal. You have to educate a lot. You have to really bring different assets to the table, and building that credibility is really important. So I think for me is the learning in my career that similar to expanding into other markets, you cannot copy paste strategies when it comes to different cohorts of target audience.
I love the fact that your ability to adapt and pivot has gone, vertically and horizontal. It's that skill that's really stead you in that that ability to adapt and pivot for not just countries but also the audience, the size, and the product, that I think has really enabled you to be very flexible and to do a variety of things, because lots of people get pigeonholed and they tend to work in one area, and you've definitely been much broader in that. So in your current role, again, this is another shift of a different organization, isn't it, Toku? They're a Japanese owned business, I understand.
Is a Singaporean, but the name is Japanese.
Okay. So yeah. And so what they're quite different to the other companies you work for as well, aren't they?
Is a very interesting thing because they had some similarities to a previous company I worked for called Boxbone, and then they also had a product that is kind of like in the similar market to what Zendesk was. So it's kind of like a mix of both. So yeah.
Oh, great. So what's been the main challenges you found in your current role? Because you've built it from scratch, haven't you, the marketing function?
Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit more. When I joined them, so I joined 4 years ago, and they were still kind of like building. They they were really in the infants when it comes to marketing. But when I joined, the first priority was the help them with the Series A pitch deck, and then building that narrative and everything. And through that process, I realized that we really needed to define our positioning. So if we wanted to go after larger deals in the APAC region, we had to make sure that we had a strong value proposition that would resonate with those companies. So one of the, I wouldn't say challenge, but an opportunity was for me to kind of like start creating that positioning. So I went and decided to do like a whole exercise of positioning. And I love April. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but April Danforth's framework. She has an amazing framework that helps you like with 10 steps on how you can create positioning. And it really helps you to look at like what's the market, what's the competitors, what are the customer needs, what are the trends that are shaping, and what's the current landscape. And once I had clarity on like, okay, how we wanted to position our products, how we wanted to go to market, then I started building more like, okay, now we need to rebrand. Now we need to change kind of like the way we're look and feel. Now we need to go ahead and create a lot of materials to enable sales to go and speak with those organizations. So I think the challenges, instead of challenges, there was a lot of opportunities for me to start building things and then being involved in that process of creating the team from scratch. But not only the marketing team, I was also involved in a lot of different processes that were built at that time because we were a smaller company. So a lot of my involvement helped to create the company that we are today.
Fantastic. And what sort of processes did you put in place from that framework and what you've done? Is there anything specific or any sort of like almost like I did this in this order?
So, as I mentioned earlier, so for instance, one of the things that I did, like after the positioning, it was very clear. Okay, we're going to target these organizations, and these are the ideal customer profile that we're looking at. So then we started working on like the website and we started working on a specific marketing assets, but also I created a strategy on like what are the areas or what are the channels that we're going to be doing marketing. So, for instance, we started going into a lot of trade shows, a specific, very, very specific trade shows, creating our own events, doing some of these breakfast briefing, trying to target a specific accounts that we knew could work with our product. So the marketing strategy became narrow instead of us trying to do everything, because a lot of times you try to do everything and see what works. But when you are working with limited resources and limited budget, you have to be very strategic about where you put your money. So for me, doing that positioning exercise was key to make sure that the marketing strategy that I was building was very tailored to what we were trying to achieve.
Before we've gone on the call today offline, we had a discussion about the difference between digital marketing and event marketing, and that sometimes companies feel they have to do it all. Did you still use digital marketing as an approach, or was it more in the event side of things that you were focused on?
I do use digital marketing and I'm not against digital marketing. When I allocate budget, I look at like what are the priorities. And it also, when you're going to enterprise businesses, you also have to sit and listen to to your sales leader. So a lot of the times I sit with him and say, okay, what are the goals or what are the things that we're trying to do? And then from that, it comes like, okay, maybe we need to do, I don't know, this partner event with this company, or maybe we have to focus on this. So I'm not saying digital is not important, but maybe at that point doesn't really become a priority because the priority is different in that quarter because we're trying to target X amount of companies or we're trying to close this deal. And then for us to close that deal, we need to go and do an event here, or we might have to go and try to be part of this event because we know that client is going to be there. So to me, it's like I know companies, enterprise companies are not going to buy because they go and see an ad. They're not going to click and going to put, it's not a deal of putting your credit card, especially when we're talking about 6 figures or 7 figures deal. They're not going to buy online. I'm not saying it's not important because search can help you to at least be in front of certain potential buyers. But for enterprise, you need different touches, multiple touches. So really, for me, is I don't really put a lot of my budget into digital nowadays. And it's mainly because I have to really prioritize the budget and I prioritize that more into different kind of like a strategic campaigns that we do.
Exactly. And is that lovely old classic of test and measure, isn't it really? So if it's not working and then you're not getting return on investment, don't just do it because you feel like you've got to have that in the mix, which is brilliant. And I know we've also had a debate previously, when I am a bit anti the word branding, as I said to you in the past, because I think that sometimes people get confused with the word branding. They see the word branding, the logo, or everything else, but it encompasses everything else. So I prefer the word go to market, and I know we've touched on this. But how do you, in your opinion, what do you see the difference between go to market and the positioning and the branding?
Yeah. Okay, I'll tell you what. I think a lot of people think, as you just mentioned, like the word branding means colors, visual identity, and that's it. But it really goes deeper than that. So at the end of the day, branding is what how people perceive your company. It's the values that you stand for, the culture you build, how you position yourself in the market. Is that emotional connection that people might feel when they interact with your company, whether they're a customer, a partner, or someone just hearing from you the first time. So all of that is kind of like branding. And a lot of the things are not really tangible. Like is not a lot of the things that you do towards branding, people don't really perceive it, or there is not like an ROI that you can put on that. And a lot of what kind of like what we do in marketing contributes to that. So, product marketing, events, digital campaigns, they all shape the way that anyone will feel about your brand. And it's not just marketing, the one that influence the branding. So it's also like every part of the company, like your customer support, your sales, finance, how finance resolve a problem with the company. So every touch point plays a role in shaping that brand. So that's why brand is such an essential part of the marketing strategy. So I don't see as the like separate. I see them like as together. And our job is to ensure that consistency and the message that we bring to the market, making sure that it aligns with the company values and truly resonates with the audience, is very important. I think it's kind of like the brand is that thread that ties everything together. And I've read the other day, one thing I really resonate, and it was saying something like, without branding, marketing is hollow, and without marketing, branding is invisible. And we need them both to create a meaningful impact. So I think, again, to me, it's kind of like goes together, and it just not stays on the visual and logo.
That's really interesting, actually, because I was going to say that. In fact, you've almost preempted my next thinking, really, which was that what the first hire in marketing. Quite often, people say, "Let's go for a demand gen person and like get us out there." But would you agree with that? What do you think the first hire in marketing should be if you're in a small team?
Okay, so again, it really there's not like a playbook. It really depends of the type of company, the products you're selling. But I'm going to tell you, for me, product marketing is an absolute must, especially if you're going like B2B and if you're selling a tech product. A product marketeer connects those dots between what product does and what the customer needs, and they make sure that like if you do a positioning exercise, they will be executing on that positioning exercise, or they will be the ones out leading that positioning exercise. They also help with the enabling sales to make sure that they've delivered the right pitch. They can kind of like have the right materials to be in front of customers, and they really make sure that the whoever you're talking to understand the value that you're offering. So that to me would be kind of like one, or someone that has those skills. Because if you can hire a product marketeer, amazing. If you just need to hire a generic marketeer, make sure that they have those skills. Another one will be we live in a world of like consuming millions of pieces of content every day. And content is like super critical, and standing out is super critical as well. So that's where I feel also design is an important piece of a marketing, because it's that visual identity, is how you're going to be setting apart, and whether it's your website, your sales materials, and even like the advertising. So to do advertising, you have to have very good creative. And while you can really outsource a lot of those things, I have seen that when you have your designer and your product marketing in house, makes a huge difference. So I also see companies like I need to hire someone that does digital marketing skills, or they have digital marketing skills that, and that's fine. I don't think is a grown decision. But again, if you're going to do digital marketing, you're going to have to create good creative pieces. You're going to have a strong messaging to support your campaigns. And if you don't have that, it's going to be really hard to get results. So that's what I believe, that building those foundation roles first, like product marketing, design, or even someone that does content, is important. And you can outsource anything. Like I said, you can outsource digital, you can outsource PR, but that product marketing, that creative, and I've seen companies that early on invested in those roles, and you can tell the difference on how your brands are today versus other companies.
Exactly. And I think the future, it's funny because there's usually two pockets. The people that become CMOs, they've usually come from either demand gen or product marketing. And it probably does depend on what the problem is of the company and how it's evolved. But I probably said 5 years ago, it would have been demand gen. So,
Mhm.
a CMO would have been probably born out of demand gen because product marketing was still a new, it was just it was a fairly new thing 5 to 7 years ago. But I think those people that went down that product marketing job 5 to 7 years ago, they are now the current people being promoted to CMOs.
I think it's probably new in Europe, but I can tell that in the US, product marketing has been like when I was living there in 2012, 2010 to 2015, a lot of the companies already had a product marketeer. They're kind of like the earliest adapters of this role. Airbnb, Zendesk, and like a lot of very good brands today, they adopted early on this role. And I think it to me is a key role. And it's really hard to hire for a good product marketeer as well. I have to admit that when I was trying to hire for my previous organization and even today, it's not an easy one. And because again, it's very new, as you mentioned, and especially in other markets, it's quite new. You don't have a lot of people that've done it before or with those skills, but I think it's a very important role.
And sometimes people are doing product marketing and they don't know they're doing it. They haven't got it labeled product marketing.
Sure.
And so I'll often interview people actually, and then I'll say to them, what do you want to do? And then now when I've interviewed you, I've had your feedback. What do you want to do? And then they'll say, oh, I'm not really sure. I think I'm a generalist. And I'm like, oh no, you've done positioning, you've done differentiation, you've done go to market. You're naturally a product marketing person. And they're like, oh, I didn't realize. Because people, because also it's really hard to reflect on yourself, isn't it? It's
True.
easy. You when yourself, you just know what you're doing every day and what you're focusing on. You don't sit there and say, I'm doing product marketing or I'm doing this. You're just focused on the goal. So that's why I find it when people interview me, they often have a bit of they're like, oh, okay. And I love to give that feedback, and if I can spot a little trend for somebody, and people go on. And the other one is marketing ops. That's another nuancy one where people would have been more generalist, and now lots of people are starting to specialize in that area. Well, we're nearly out of time. It's gone so quickly. But is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't covered?
If there was something that I want to make sure people take away from this, and especially for those marketeers that are expanding or are going after a new vertical or going after a new type of customers, just make sure that you don't copy paste your playbook. Make sure that you do your due diligence. Make sure that you understand the new audience. Make sure that you understand the nuances of the market. Make sure that you spend the time doing that, because it's gonna make your life way easier than just going and copy pasting what you've done in a different market.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And I think the other point is to make, if you are a CMO or CEO listening to this, or even CRO, whatever you do, don't interview a marketing person and say, have you got your playbook ready to come in and just roll out with us? Because
Oh, that's a good
basically,
one.
every time you come to a different company, it's going to be different based on the problem that company has, and that agility. So, it is a question that people often get asked as a senior leader, really. Have you got your secret little playbook that you can roll out? But there's a process, and it takes you down on a flow chart. And I think it's to be aware of that, which is one of the things that this podcast is all about, really, is shining that light on marketing and how it can commercially drive the change, with CEOs as well as just marketing people, not just marketing people, because marketing people,
Yeah.
we generally know, don't we, that marketing people generally are already on this. It's the others that in the other silos in the business that don't always get it.
No, 100% agree with that. And that's a really, really good point that a lot of times marketeers are expected to come with like a strategy on an interview. Is impossible. And to me, when I interview someone and they're telling me the strategy right on an interview, is impossible, because you have to spend time inside the company. You have to spend time in the market. Unless you're coming from a competitor, it's going to be really hard for you to know the strategy on an interview. So 100% agree.
I think it's a bit of a red flag if you're asked to do a whole long strategy for like a year strategy before you've joined the business.
True.
I think a lot of people get very suspicious about that because they're thinking, are they going to steal my ideas, or they don't like it? But this is an awful lot of work up front, and you're also guessing because you're not in the company and you've not interviewed anybody. So I think it's always better to maybe give an example of where you've done it before and let the person walk them through what they've done rather than what they're going to do.
Exactly. That's what your 90 days are for. Exactly. Like to really get to know your company once you start in that role, is to really understand and then come up with a strategy. But before joining the company, unless you're coming from the competitor and you know the tactics, the initiatives, the strategies that work, I doubt you're gonna be able to give a good answer of the strategy on an interview.
And even then there's a different culture, isn't there? So you might come from a competitor but the culture of the company might be entirely different because of just where they're based. It could be that that you're coming from an American company, you're going to work for a competitor that's based in Europe, or
True.
they're a small company or large company. So there is so many nuances.
Exactly.
It's a kind of there. So thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure, and the first guest I've ever had that's talked about the Latin market. So it's been a real special one for me. So thank you for tuning in to the Spotlight of Marketing. If you've joined today's episode, please feel free to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And don't forget to share it with your colleagues, friends, and other people within the marketing community, especially your CEO, if you're trying to get something changed in your business. Until next time, keep shining the light on the power of marketing to grow your business.